is not an option. It is a fact. So I'm Ixchel Ruiz. I work for JFrog. This is my second time in Tel Aviv, so I'm super excited. Yes, exactly like that. It's my first time in a DevOps Days. So here in Tel Aviv. So this is me, and probably you will hear a different accent. So I'm from Mexico. I live in Switzerland. I'm a Java champion. I'm a developer. I work for JFrog. I'm part of different organizations for open source. So if you want to talk about that, I'm more than happy. I've also collaborated in some books. The latest one is this one, DevOps Tools for Java Developers. So I am a developer. I cannot stress that enough. And software, it is my life. But one of the things I like to do the most is to share knowledge, to speak with fellow developers and bring some ideas. I actually believe, like, if somebody asks me, and they have asked me in security in the United States, in the TSA, like, what do you do? I'm like, I have so many things. I'm a firefighter. I'm a miracle worker. Superman. That's me. But in other words, I'm also a developer. But the other part that I like to say when I say I'm a developer is I'm a human being writing code for humans to improve human life. And believe it or not, the first consumer of our code, it's our fellow developers, or even ourselves 6 months from now. So be kind, document. The other thing that I truly believe is that there are jobs, there are tasks that should be done by machines, not by humans. So let's talk about failure. Failure, etymology, like the word comes from fallare in Latin, which means it's like, in the physical sense, meant like I'm going to trip. In the ontological sense, it was like I didn't achieve success, or I'm even lying. But when we face failure, sometimes we have this reaction. And before I continue, I will leave you with this photo that's one of my favorites. I also want to tell you that I have been very, very happy listening to different sessions in this conferences, because they have all built up to my session. Like 4 of the 5 sessions that I have been watching in this room talked about failure. The failure refactor, the building sites for reliability. We also discussed our failures in our careers, in startups. So failure is pervasive in our lives. And sometimes it makes us look from behind. We feel isolated, or that we are drowning in some way. Failure can be that dramatic in our lives. Sometimes we even reach depression. And let me tell you that our emotions can have an impact on our physical health. For example, if you didn't know, like, our hearts can change shapes when we are depressed. So they can actually see how your heart looks different. But failure has been changing. How do we see failure has changed in the past years? Actually, this change happened almost like 3 or 4 decades ago. But let's see. John Bowers, in his TED Talk, is saying, like, we should aim for perfection. Because he is in an industry where a single error is costing lives. So he says we don't have the luxury of making mistakes. On the other hand, Astro Taylor, he was part of the Google X, the Moonshot Factory. So he describes in his TED Talk how every single day, entire engineering teams will sit down and cheer and look for ideas on how to kill their projects. And if they were able to kill their project, they will receive bonuses, clappings. They will get vacations just because they were able to kill their projects. So a total different perspective on failure. But let's see failure in IT. So in this particular paper, while your IT project may be riskier than you think, the researchers started noticing that in IT, the black swans are super typical. And for example, there is a high number of out-of-control projects. And for example, 1 in 6 projects overrun their costs into 200%. And almost every single project overrun in a schedule 70%. And not only that, they didn't reach what they were trying to do, or they even sunk entire companies. And even in the personal point, for example, this was the director of one of the top MIT labs, and he writes, this was 20 years after he was in that particular job position. And he actually said, this is the failure that haunted me my entire life. But then at the level project, at the personal project, but we also have a different relationship with failure in IT. In testing, we have this love-hate relationship. It's our motto: fail fast, fail often, never trust a test that you haven't seen fail. And you have to have a huge amount of tests like integration, end-to-end, contract, provider, and even we make them look good. I'm not going to talk a lot about security and how costly is security and the errors that we committed here. I will skip us the litany of log4shell and all the problems that we have with different NPM packages. And this is another perspective. In our APIs, when we are documenting them, and we are writing the contracts, we are defining what to say. We have noticed that, for example, we don't even use the keyword deprecation. So failure, it is in our industry, and it's super, super pervasive. I didn't understand failure, and this idea of I don't understand failure. If we hate it, we love it. So I did what I usually do, research. And I start understanding this particular topic until I found the failure issue from the Harvard Review in 2011. And it turns out that it actually helped a lot. Because not all failures are the same. So there are 3 types of failures: preventable, complexity-related, and intelligent. The preventable ones are the ones that we don't learn anything about them. So those are the ones that we have to avoid. These are the bad failures. These are the ones that should haunt us. This is a machine shop. We shouldn't be adding humans on this part. The complexity-related type of failures, it's because there is a combination of very rarely circumstances with needs and people, so it's difficult to predict, and it's difficult to reproduce. So that's why we are not so well prepared for this kind of failures. These failures are easily diminished with best practices, checklists. The intelligent failures. These are the failures that we need to do. For example, this is Booking.com, A/B testing, finding and creating the best of breed. We need to have these failures. We can learn from them. So what do we need to learn from our failures? Well, it turns out that learning from our failures is not that difficult. We need to identify where we failed, analyze them. In the previous to the last session, we were talking about pre-mortem, post-mortem, and without any blame. And once we have identified our failures and analyzing our failures, we need to have the space to do experimentation. We need to recognize the small failures for complex systems and extract the lessons, design solutions, and have safe and controlled settings. But it's not only important that we learn, it's how fast we learn. The researchers discovered that there is a tipping point between failure and success. Even if you are trying to learn from your failures, there is a point where you won't be successful or you will be successful. In this particular paper, and I totally recommend you to read it, my slides will be available because, as you have seen, I present a lot of papers, best practices. So this is really interesting, at least for me. And I think you will also benefit from all these lessons without suffering by yourself. So the tipping point between failure and success, it's about, there are people and their background is not that different. But some group of people will not learn from their mistakes versus other group of people that will learn from their mistakes. The difference is that they don't actually learn fast enough. Like they don't fail fast enough to detect the different patterns of failure. Well, let's suppose that we are learning from the right or from the intelligent failures. We totally avoided the preventable failures. We know that we need to learn. We need to learn fast. We need to fail fast to learn. How do we benefit from that? Because that's not the end of the story. Another paper, increase your return on failure. How do you can actually benefit from this? Well, you have to learn from every failure. You have, and this is also the key part, share the lessons. Because it doesn't matter that you learn, you have your retrospective, you have your postmortem, your team probably knows it, but your organization doesn't. So you have to spread these lessons to the entire organization. And you have to continue reviewing your pattern of failure because things change. Time is never static. And I have talked about several things, but most of these things cannot happen if you don't have psychological safety. So who here has heard about this term, psychological safety? Very few hands, and I'm not surprised. Before, when I was researching for this and other sessions, I read this particular paper, and it is set up in the health industry. So they were comparing hospitals that I have psychological safety practices in place versus the one that doesn't. So I told my husband, if we ever go to a hospital and I ask the nurse, do you know what psychological safety is? And if she says no, please take me out. Because in the hospitals where there is psychological safety, they have these open doors policies where nurses can go in and ask their doctors or say to the doctors, I think that there is a problem with this particular dosage. Or I think there is a problem with this particular protocol. In the hospitals where the psychological safety was not present, the problem is that you don't talk with people higher in your hierarchy because you fear that there is going to be a problem of feedback or it's going to decrease your chances of a promotion. So psychological safety is like trust, but trust is built between two individuals. I trust you. You trust me. Psychological safety is the entire environment. And this is very, very important that the entire environment is well enough so everybody can ask questions, voice concerns, or plain say, I don't know. I don't know should be a very valid response answer in any meeting. And psychological safety, what it's giving you is the opportunity to have that for expressing. So let's come back to failure in IT. I'm in a DevOps conference, so I don't have to explain this particular graph. But we know that it's all about feedback. One of the things that it is telling us is that things are going to happen repeatedly. We try to increase the feedback in every single stage of our software development cycle. And if we have enough feedback, if we can understand our inputs, our outputs, our process, there is enough feedback, we actually extract knowledge from all this data. Our problems will be reduced, our processes will be streamlined, and we will be happier. And in software development, we have the 3 types of failure. So, as I told you, the first one, the avoidables, the ones that we are not learning anything from it. Like if we are building our software and compliance and Q&A is telling us, you added a dependency that has a license not compatible with us, it's too late. That error shouldn't have happened. We shouldn't have waited until we are deploying a specific version for that to happen. So there are tools that help us. And of course, I have to tell you about one of the tools that I like the most because it has the single source of truth, consolidating and enhancing data. And the most important thing is that you can prevent or create different kinds of processes. But if you want to hear more about this, I will be outside and there's our booth there. So I hope I have given some ideas about failure. And failure, it is, as I said, and several other speakers during the day have told you, it's not a question about if, it's a question about when. And we're going to fail. We're going to fail several times. And what I'm trying to give you here is the tools to realize which ones should we be for or allowing ourselves to be doing. Like, for example, the booking.com and A/B testing. The other ones, when we have a specific set of situations that are not easily reproduced, we have the checklists. How do we avoid it? There was this interesting case about pilots in Japanese culture. In Japanese culture, we have even ways to address between different people in the hierarchy. And there were a lot of problems during takeoff and landing in the cabin of Japanese flights. Turns out that they were just reduced by changing between Japanese to English. And what was the improvement there? First of all, that they started to have an environment where they could voice out incongruencies. So, for example, when the pilot was doing some kind of process and he missed something, the co-pilot, just because how they addressed themselves, couldn't point out that specific problem. But suddenly, in English, they didn't have that particular problem. So the co-pilot could say, you forgot this particular step. So checklists with psychological safety allow us to do that. We need to keep testing. We need to keep providing our users, our end users, with the different options and the right options. And the other thing that I want you to remind us is that we are not good at predicting the future. This caught us by surprise. So we need to continue moving, evolving, and improving our systems. And remember, we are in a crossroads between different requirements and different situations that will lead us to failure. And knowledge, sharing knowledge, and using the right tools is the only way to move forward. So never stop learning, because this is a race. This is a long, long race. This will never end. They will never stop. Our challenges increases and move at the same time as we do move. So I hope I gave you a fresher look about failure. And you, like me, now understand a little bit more about the different types of failures, how we can leverage, what are the key ingredients to understand, to learn, to implement, and what can we do with the different types of failures. Because believe me, things are not always like they look or we think they are. That is not a square. That's definitely not a square. So, at the end of the day, I just want us all to be successful. And as I mentioned before, I'm going to be today and tomorrow in our booth. And this is something that I always ask from the audience. Feedback. Hey, I even brought you a manual for feedback. So, thank you very much. If there is any question, I'm more than happy to take it. And you should be very, very happy because I let you go 10 minutes ahead for the happy hour.